The Sunoco sign on Route 119 had been dark for 11 years. The county assessor valued the whole property at $14,200. Two men in separate trucks had already stopped by the week of the funeral to leave cards under the door. When Norma Pruitt finally unlocked the station for the first time as its owner, she found something bolted to the floor of the back office that her husband had never once mentioned in 22 years of marriage, and the combination was their wedding date. Norma Pruitt turned 49 on the 14th of March, in the passenger seat of her sister-in-law's Buick, eating a gas station sandwich because neither of them had thought to stop somewhere real. Donna had offered to cook. Norma had said don't bother. That was the whole of the celebration. 6 days earlier, she had stood in 12-degree cold at the Harlan County Memorial Gardens and watched a man she had loved for 22 years get lowered into ground that was too frozen to accept him without effort. The backhoe operator had needed 2 passes. She remembered that detail with a clarity she did not want, the sound of it, the mechanical indifference of it. In a way, she did not remember the eulogy or the flowers or which relatives had driven from where. The backhoe, 2 passes. That was what stayed. Raymond Pruitt had been sick for 4 years and dying for 1. There is a difference between those 2 things that only caregivers understand. Being sick means there is still a schedule to maintain, still medications to track and appointments to keep, and some arrangement of normal life to preserve around the edges of the illness. Dying means the schedule becomes the illness. It means learning to read a man's breathing the way some people read weather. It means sleeping in a recliner in a hospital room for 11 nights straight because the chair was close enough to reach him if something changed in the dark. It means that by the time the end comes, you have already been gone from your own life for so long that the absence of the thing you were dreading does not feel like relief. It feels like being dismissed from a job you never applied for, with no reference and nowhere to go. Norma had worked part-time at the county clerk's office until Raymond's second hospitalization. After that, there was no part-time. There was only Raymond, and the disease and the long arithmetic of managing both on a fixed income and a Visa card that was carrying $11,400 by February and climbing. The house was theirs outright. Raymond had been particular about that, had paid it off early, in a way she'd never fully understood given what the station brought in. The truck was paid. The utilities were current. But there was $214 in the checking account the morning of the birthday sandwich, and Donna's Buick, and no particular reason to go home. She was not a woman who dramatized her own situation. She had grown up in Bell County, the second of 5 children, in a house where money was always the subtext of every conversation, even when the conversation appeared to be about something else. She knew what it meant to count carefully. She knew how to make the numbers work. What she did not know, what she was only beginning to understand, sitting in that passenger seat with the cellophane wrapper in her lap, was what came next when you had spent 4 years building your entire life around a task that no longer existed. Raymond had left her the house, the truck, and the filling station on Route 119 outside of Evarts. She had not been to the station in close to 3 years. Raymond had kept it nominally operational through some arrangement she'd never pressed him to explain, stopping in a few mornings a week, keeping the lights on, making some kind of showing, until the second hospitalization made even that impossible. After that, the pumps sat idle. The county had eventually pulled the operating license for inactivity. There was a $340 fine attached to the property for a code violation involving the canopy drainage, which had apparently been cited twice and ignored. The station had no tenants, no income, no prospects that Donna's husband Gary, who had opinions about everything and had offered them freely throughout the funeral reception, could identify. Gary had driven out and looked at it the week Raymond died, uninvited, and reported back with the specific satisfaction of a man delivering bad news he considers useful. Structurally questionable, tanks would need environmental inspection before any sale. Location was secondary highway, not primary. The Sunoco branding agreement had lapsed. His conclusion: sell it for whatever the land would bring, pay the fine, and move on before the carrying costs ate into what little she had left. She had nodded at Gary the way she had learned to nod at people who confused having an opinion with having been asked. but she had listened to him, not because she trusted his judgment, she had 22 years of evidence on that question, but because the math was the math. $214, $11,400 on the visa. A part-time job she had walked away from and could not be certain she could return to. A property that was costing her money. Every month it sat there with a fine unpaid and a canopy draining into the wrong place. She would go once, deal with whatever needed dealing with, find out what the land would actually bring, not what Gary thought it would bring. Be back before dark. That had been the plan on the morning of March 20th, when she borrowed Donna's Buick and drove the 14 miles to Everts, with a ring of keys she had found in Raymond's dresser drawer and a thermos of coffee she had made too strong. She had not planned to stay. The Harlan County Property Valuation Administrator's office was in a building on Central Street that smelled of old carpet and toner ink, staffed by a woman named Patsy, who had worked there since before Norma was married, and who delivered assessed values the way a doctor delivers a diagnosis, with the flat professional kindness of someone who has learned not to take the reaction personally. The assessed value of the Route 119 property, land and improvements combined, was $14,200. Patsy had pulled the record without being asked, which meant she had already looked it up, which meant word had gotten around that Norma Pruitt was the new owner of Raymond's Station, and someone had thought the number worth knowing in advance. Harlan County worked that way. It had always worked that way. Information moved through the county like water through limestone, invisibly, and along paths established long before anyone thought to map them. "That's the full parcel?" Norma asked. 1.4 acres, the structure, the canopy, 2 underground storage tanks. Patsy laid the printout on the counter. "The tanks are a liability, technically. Any buyer's going to want an environmental assessment before they'll touch it. That runs anywhere from $800 to $1,500, depending on who you use. And the fine. $340. Yes, that'll need to be resolved before any title transfer." Norma looked at the number on the printout. $14,200. After the fine, after the environmental assessment, after whatever a real estate agent took if she used one, after the visa balance, she was looking at something that might cover 3 months of ordinary living if she was careful. Gary had not been wrong about the math. She hated that he had not been wrong. She drove from the PVA office to the First National branch on Cumberland Avenue and sat across from a loan officer named Derek, who was young enough to be her nephew and who had the particular manner of someone trained to deliver refusals with warmth. She was not there to borrow. She was there to ask a practical question about whether the property, as collateral, could support any kind of short-term line while she figured out what she had. Derek's answer was careful and not unkind, and amounted to no. The tanks, the lapsed license, the code violation, the age of the structure. Each item on its own might be manageable. Together, they described something a lending institution could not enthusiastically support. She thanked him and left. On the way to Evarts, she stopped at the Farmer's Supply on 421 because she needed to use the restroom and because she had known the man behind the counter, Cecil Frazier, for 30 years. Cecil was 71 and had sold Raymond Pruitt seed and fencing and propane fittings for longer than that. He came around the counter when he saw her and held both her hands in his for a moment and said Raymond was a good man and he meant it in the plain way, that plain men mean things. She told him where she was going and why. Cecil nodded slowly. The way he nodded at weather forecasts he found unsurprising. "That station's been more or less done since Raymond got sick," he said. "He kept showing up there out of habit, I think. Or stubbornness. One of the two." He paused. "You know Dale Combs has had his eye on that corner for a while." She knew the name. Dale Combs ran Combs Aggregate and Equipment out of a yard off Route 38, a quarter-mile from the Kentucky-Virginia line. He was 63, had been in Harlan County his whole life, and owned 11 pieces of commercial property along the secondary highway corridors that fed coal traffic. She had met him twice, once at a chamber dinner years ago, once at Raymond's visitation, where he had arrived late, spoken briefly to her, and left before the family prayer. "He's looked at that parcel before?" she asked. "Twice that I know of," Cecil said. "Raymond wouldn't sell. Dale wasn't happy about it, but Raymond wouldn't sell. He said it without elaboration, as though the fact explained itself. She asked what Dale Combs would want with a decommissioned filling station on a secondary highway. Cecil looked at her, with the mild patience of a man who had watched the county long enough to understand things that were not written down anywhere. "That corner's got road access from 3 directions," he said, "and there's a water line running under that property that don't show up on most maps. Dale Combs knows where every water line in this county runs." She thought about that in the truck on the way to Evarts. 3 directions. A water line that wasn't on the maps. Raymond had owned that corner for 31 years and had never mentioned either of those things to her. Not once. The road to Evarts followed Clover Fork for most of its length, the creek running brown and quick on the left from 2 days of early spring rain. She had driven this road 1,000 times. It looked the same as it always had, and different from how she remembered it, the way places look when you are seeing them with new information you cannot yet name. She had the keys in her jacket pocket. She had the thermos, still half full and gone cold. She had $214 in the checking account, and a fine to pay, and a piece of property the county valued at $14,200, and a man named Dale Combs, who had looked at that corner twice and been refused twice, and whose truck she had, she now realized, seen parked on the far shoulder of 119 on her drive-in, engine running, no one visible inside. She did not think about that yet. She was going once. Deal with it. Back before dark. The station sat at the junction of Route 119 and Clover Fork Road on a slight rise that kept it visible from 3 directions, just as Cecil had said. She had not thought about that before, the visibility of it, the way the land lifted just enough to put the building at a sightline from every approach. It had always just been Raymond's station. Now she looked at it the way a stranger might, and a stranger would notice that rise. She pulled into the lot and sat in the truck for a moment. The canopy over the pump islands was still standing, which surprised her. One corner had pulled away from its support bracket and tilted at an angle that would not survive another winter, and the drainage problem Gary had mentioned was visible as a dark stain running down the concrete apron on the east side. But the structure itself, the main building, the service bay attached to its left, was standing straight. No visible roof sag. The cinder block walls were intact. Someone had replaced 2 of the windows at some point with plywood cut to fit, but the remaining glass was unbroken and the frames were tight. She got out of the truck. The air smelled of creek water and old motor oil and the particular mineral cold of eastern Kentucky in late March, when the ground is thawing in the daytime and refreezing at night, and the whole county has a smell like something being slowly wrung out. The gravel lot was thick with dead grass coming up through the aggregate. A plastic bag had blown against the base of the Sunoco sign and stayed there long enough to become part of it. She tried 3 keys before she found the right one for the front door. Inside, the smell changed. Dust and old rubber and something faintly chemical, not unpleasant, just layered with time, the specific atmosphere of a room that has been closed for years but was never damp. That was the first thing she registered professionally, through the habits of 4 years spent monitoring Raymond's hospital rooms for mold and air quality. No moisture damage. In a cinder block building in a creek valley in Harlan County, that was not nothing. She stood in the front room and let her eyes adjust. The shelving units were still up, the metal gondola racks that had held motor oil and antifreeze, and the assorted impulse merchandise of every small filling station in America. They were empty except for 3 quarts of 10-30 left on the bottom shelf and a cardboard display for an air freshener brand she didn't recognize, still in its original packaging. The checkout counter was intact. The register was gone, sold or moved at some point, but the counter itself was solid, a poured concrete top with a steel edge rail that Raymond had been particular about keeping level. She ran her hand along it. The level was still good. The service bay was through a connecting door to the left. She opened it and found the expected, an empty lift, oil-stained concrete, a pegboard with outline marks where tools had hung for so long they'd left shadows, a shop sink, with both taps still attached. The overhead fluorescents were dead, but light came in well through the bay door windows, and she could see that the ceiling was intact, the roof trusses sound. She went back through to the main room and through a second door at the rear into what Raymond had called the office, which was a room approximately 12 feet by 10 feet that contained a metal desk, a filing cabinet with 3 of its 4 drawers open and empty, a wooden chair with a broken spindle in the back, and a window that faced north toward the tree line. She opened the filing cabinet drawers one by one. Empty, empty, empty. The bottom drawer was closed, and when she opened it, she found a single manila folder containing the original Sunoco franchise agreement from 1993 and a stack of fuel delivery invoices from 2011, banded with a rubber band that disintegrated when she touched it. She set those on the desk and looked around the room. That was when she noticed the floor. The office floor was poured concrete like the rest of the building, covered with a layer of commercial tile in a pattern of brown and beige squares. The tile was old, original to the building, she guessed, from the early 1970s when the station had first been built. Most of it was worn to a uniform gray in the high traffic paths, with the original color surviving only at the edges and in the corners. Standard, expected, except in the southwest corner, behind the desk. The tile in that corner was different, not visibly different at first. The color was the same brown and beige pattern, the same worn surface. But when she moved the desk aside, it rolled more easily than it should have. The legs fitted with casters she hadn't noticed. She saw it clearly. The grout lines didn't match. Every other section of tile in that room had grout lines running in a continuous grid, corner to corner. In the southwest corner, behind where the desk had sat, the grout lines stopped and restarted in a pattern that was shifted by roughly half an inch, the geometry of someone who had lifted a section of tile, done something underneath it, and relaid it, without quite matching the original grid. She crouched down and looked at it. The relayed section was approximately 3 feet by 4 feet. The tile edges along the seam were slightly higher than the surrounding floor, the way tile lifts when the adhesive beneath it has been disturbed and reset without full curing pressure. Someone had done this carefully, someone who cared about not being noticed, but someone who had perhaps not had the tile layer's full attention to the grid. She pressed one edge of the section with her palm. It didn't flex. Whatever was underneath was solid, not hollow, not loose fill. She pressed harder along the seam and felt the tile give the faintest fraction, the way a lid gives when it is sitting in a frame rather than bonded to it. She sat back on her heels. She was still there, in that position, when she heard gravel moving in the parking lot. She stood and looked out the north window. A black F-350 with Combs aggregate decals on the door panel had pulled in beside her borrowed Buick. The driver stayed in the cab. The engine ran. She looked at the truck. She looked at the tile. She looked at the truck again. Then she went back to the desk, pulled it a few more inches from the corner, and knelt down to look more carefully at what Raymond had hidden and why he had never thought to tell her. She needed something flat and thin. She went to the service bay and found, on the floor near the shop sink, a paint scraper with a 4-inch blade that had been left behind when everything else was cleared out. She brought it back to the office and worked it into the seam along the south edge of the tile section, where the give had been most pronounced. The section lifted cleanly, not tile by tile, as a single piece, a tray of sorts. The tiles adhered to a 1/4-inch plywood backing that had been cut to fit a recess in the concrete below. Whoever had built this had routed the recess into the original slab, fitted a steel lip around its edge, and constructed the tray as a removable panel. The tile pattern on top was the camouflage. The engineering underneath was deliberate and unhurried, and had been done by someone who intended it to last. She set the panel aside and looked into the recess. The smell came first, the specific sealed air smell of a space that has been closed for years, not damp, not rotting, simply arrested, like opening a book that has not been opened in a long time. She had not known until that moment that absence had a smell, but it did, and it was this. The recess was approximately 8 inches deep. Inside it sat 2 things. The first was a green metal document box, the kind sold at hardware stores for fireproofing important papers, with a combination lock on the hasp. The box was roughly 12 inches long and 8 inches wide, its paint scuffed at the corners from handling over the years, its surface dusty, but its lock mechanism clean and oiled. Someone had maintained it. Someone had opened it more than once. The second was a canvas zipper bag, faded olive, the kind of bag that might have carried tools or personal items or simply been repurposed from some earlier life. It was folded flat, sitting beneath the document box, and it was heavier than it looked when she lifted it. She set both items on the desk. She opened the canvas bag first. Inside were 47 envelopes, not uniform, different sizes, different colors, some white, some the manila of returned mail, one pale blue, one the kind of cream stationery sold at pharmacies. Each one had been opened carefully, the flap slit with a letter opener rather than torn. Each one had a date written in the upper right corner in Raymond's handwriting, not a postmark date, a received date, written in black ballpoint in the small, deliberate hand he had used for everything practical. The oldest date she could find was September 1994. The most recent was November 2021, 4 months before his second hospitalization. She did not read them yet. She set them in order by date, the way she had learned to organize Raymond's medical records, chronologically, without judgment, because you could not understand a sequence until you could see its shape. Then she turned to the document box, the combination. She had been thinking about it since she'd read the message from the locksmith's business card that one of the men had left, the card she'd pocketed without calling. She thought about Raymond's deliberate mind, his preference for things that were memorable without being obvious. She tried the combination of their wedding date, 09/14/91. Left, right, left. The hasp opened. She sat down in the wooden chair with the broken spindle and opened the box. Inside, resting on top of a folded document, was a composition book, standard, black and white marbled cover, the kind sold in school supply aisles. Its cover was worn soft at the corners from years of handling. She opened it to the first page, Raymond's handwriting, the same small, deliberate hand. If you are reading this, I am gone, and you found the flaw. I am sorry I never told you. I want to try to explain why I didn't, but I'm not sure I can do it justice on paper. I was never as good with words as you were. What I was good at was keeping track. So that is what most of this book is, a record. Start at page 3. She turned to page 3. The first entry was dated August 12, 1993. 3 weeks before the Sunoco franchise agreement was signed, she noticed. 3 weeks before the station officially opened. Harlan Combs, 61, Evarts, lost the Clover Fork Road access dispute. County ruled against him. Came in the morning, sat in the truck for an hour before he came inside. I made coffee. We talked for 3 hours. I filed the appeal on his behalf the following week through Whitfield's office. No charge. He didn't ask me to. He didn't know I knew how. She read it twice. Harlan Combs. She did not know the name immediately. Then she did. Not the man, but the name. Dale Combs's father. The aggregate yard off Route 38 had been Harlan Combs's before it was Dale's. She turned the page. The entries continued in the same format. A name, an age, a location within the county, a brief description of a situation, and then a quiet notation of what Raymond had done about it. Always specific, never self-congratulatory. The voice of a man writing a log, not a testament. September 4th, 1993. Luann Fraser, 34, Holmes Mill. Facing condemnation on the family property, drainage easement dispute. County gave 60 days. Filed objection with PVA on procedural grounds. Bought her 4 months. Long enough for her to find her own lawyer. Cecil Fraser's daughter-in-law. She was almost certain of it. She kept reading. The entries came in clusters, sometimes 3 or 4 in a month, sometimes none for 6 weeks. They described access disputes and easement challenges and condemnation proceedings and mineral rights conflicts and zoning objections, the specific legal texture of a rural county where land was the primary inheritance and its loss was the primary catastrophe. The situations were always different. Raymond's response was always the same. Quiet, procedural, filed through proper channels, never announced. She was on page 11 when the first letter in the canvas bag made sense. She went back to the envelope dated September 1994, the oldest one, and opened it. "Mr. Pruitt, I don't know how to thank you for what you did for my father's road access. He got to keep the property. He died on it, which is what he wanted. I know you said you didn't want anything, so I'm not sending anything. I just wanted you to know it mattered. T. Markham, Pathfork." She set the letter down. She picked up the next one. November 1994. A woman named Darlene Hogg from Baxter, who had kept a strip of bottomland her late husband's family had worked for 60 years because someone had filed a procedural challenge to a mining company's easement claim, a challenge she had not known was being filed, by a man she had never met, who ran a filling station on Route 1119, and apparently knew enough property law to find the seam in a legal argument and press on it until it opened. She understood, slowly, what she was reading. Raymond Pruitt had no law degree. She knew that. He had taken 2 years at Southeast Community College in the late 1970s and then come back to Harlan County to help his father, and never left. What he had, she was understanding now, was 30 years of reading. She thought of the shelves at home, the stacked law reviews and county records digests and property casebooks she had always assumed were a hobby, the way some men collected tools or followed baseball, and the specific intelligence of a man who understood systems the way other men understood engines, who could look at a legal filing the way a mechanic looks at a fuel line and identify exactly where the pressure was wrong. He had been doing this since before they were married. He had been doing it for free, through the station, for 31 years, and he had told no one, not her, not anyone. She turned to page 22 of the composition book, and the entries were still coming, steady as rainfall, name after name after name. The composition book had 68 pages of entries. She counted 61 distinct cases across 28 years, 61 families who had kept something: land, access, water, a road, a field, a strip of bottomland, because a man at a filling station on Route 1119 had quietly read their situation and found the procedural thread that unraveled the claim against them. 61 cases filed through lawyers who didn't know who had done the underlying research, or through Raymond's own hand when the filing was simple enough that a non-attorney could manage it, or through back channels she did not yet fully understand. She was still reading when the knock came at the front door. Not the office door, the front door of the station, which she had not locked behind her. 3 knocks, deliberate. The knock of a man who considers himself expected. She looked at the composition book in her hands. She looked at the canvas bag of 47 letters. She looked at the document box still open on the desk, its contents, the composition book, and beneath where the composition book had rested, a folded document she had not yet read, visible in the afternoon light coming through the north window. She closed the box. She closed the composition book. She put them both back in the recess, set the canvas bag in after them, and lifted the tile panel back into its frame. She pushed the desk over it. Then she walked out to the front room to answer the door. Dale Combs was a tall man, running to heaviness in the way of men who were once physically capable and have not yet adjusted their self-image to account for the years. He had a broad, weathered face and the particular manner of someone accustomed to being the most prepared person in any room he entered. The slight forward lean, the handshake offered before the door was fully open, the eyes moving briefly to what was behind her before settling back on her face. Mrs. Pruitt. He held a paper cup of coffee from somewhere, as though he had planned to be casual. Dale Combs. I don't know if you remember me from the visitation. I remember you, she said. I wanted to come by and offer my condolences in person. Raymond was a fixture in this county for a long time. He looked past her at the interior of the station with the practiced neutrality of a man trying not to look like he's appraising something. I also wanted to be straightforward with you, since I think that's the respectful way to handle this. I've had an interest in this parcel for a number of years. Raymond and I talked about it once or twice. I don't think the timing was ever right for him. She said nothing. She had learned, in 4 years of hospital waiting rooms and insurance calls and conversations with administrators who needed to feel in control, that silence was a tool most people could not tolerate and would rush to fill. "I'd like to make you an offer," Dale said. "A real one, not what the county's got it assessed at." He named a number, $67,000. He said it the way men say numbers they believe are generous, with a slight pause before, to let the size of it land. She kept her face still. "I know that's a sight more than the assessed value," he said, "but I think that's a fair reflection of what the location is actually worth to the right buyer. Three-direction road access is hard to find in this county." He smiled. "I've been patient about this corner for a long time. I'd rather do this cleanly and quickly, if that works for you." She told him she needed time to think about it. His smile held, but something behind it recalibrated. "Of course," he said. "I understand you're still dealing with a lot. I just want you to know there are carrying costs here, the code violation, the environmental question on the tanks, and those don't get smaller with time. I've got a contractor who can manage all of that as part of the purchase, makes the whole thing cleaner for you." She thanked him. She told him she would be in touch. She held the door, and he left. She watched the F-350 pull out onto Route 119 and head north, and she stood in the doorway until it was out of sight, and then she went back to the office and moved the desk and lifted the tile panel and took the composition book back out of the recess. She sat in the broken chair and found the entry for Harlan Combs again. August 12, 1993. Harlan Combs, 61, Evarts. Lost the Clover Fork Road access dispute. County ruled against him. Came in the morning, sat in the truck for an hour before he came inside. I made coffee. We talked for 3 hours. I filed the appeal on his behalf the following week through Whitfield's office. No charge. He didn't ask me to. He didn't know I knew how. She read the next line, which she had not read before because she had turned the page too quickly. His son Dale was with him, 19 years old, sat in the truck the whole time, wouldn't come in. I don't think the boy understood what his father was about to lose. I don't think he understood what it cost a man to ask for help. Maybe he'll learn. Some do. She sat with that for a long time. Dale Combs had been 19 years old, sitting in a truck in this parking lot, while Raymond Pruitt saved his father's land. And now Dale Combs was 63, sitting in a truck in this same parking lot, trying to buy that land from Raymond Pruitt's widow for $67,000, which was $52,000 more than the county said it was worth, but was still, she was beginning to understand, a very small number compared to what Raymond had understood this corner to be. She did not cry. She had cried at the hospital and at the cemetery and in the shower twice and in the Buick twice more, and she was not finished crying. But this was not a moment for crying. This was a moment for sitting still in a broken chair in a cold office and understanding what kind of man she had been married to for 22 years and how much of him she had never known. He had spent 31 years helping people keep their land. He had done it quietly, without credit, without compensation, without telling her or anyone else. He had sat in this room, this exact room, in a chair that may have been this same chair, and read documents and found arguments and filed challenges and written appeals. And when the work was done, he had locked the door and gone home, and been Raymond, her Raymond, who tracked mud in from the garden, and fell asleep during the 10 o'clock news, and brought her coffee in bed on Saturday mornings, without being asked. She looked down at her hands, which were resting open in her lap, and she thought about all the Saturdays. She had believed, in the imprecise way that long marriages allow you to believe things you have never explicitly examined, that she knew who Raymond was. She had known his habits and his preferences and his silences and his particular way of laughing at things he found genuinely funny, which was quietly, and to himself, never performing it. She had known the shape of him. She had not known the interior. 61 families, 28 years, filed quietly, without announcement, through a filling station on a secondary highway in Harlan County, Kentucky. She thought about all the times she had asked him what he was reading, and he had said, just some property stuff, and she had nodded and gone back to whatever she was doing, and he had gone back to his books, and neither of them had pushed further, and she had believed, she had allowed herself to believe, that she understood the dimensions of the life they shared. She pressed her palms flat on the composition book, She had missed him. Not the man who died. She had been present for that, exhaustingly, completely present. She had missed the man who lived here, in this room, doing this work, being this person. She had been married to him for 22 years, and she had missed him. That was the weight that settled into her chest then, and did not move. Not grief exactly. She had grief already. She knew its shape. This was something adjacent to grief, but different from it. The understanding that love, even long love, even careful love, can be a partial thing. That you can share a bed with someone for 2 decades and still be standing, at the end, at the edge of a room you never knew existed. She closed the composition book. She opened the document box again and reached past where the composition book had been and took out the folded document she had not yet read. It was folded in thirds, the way legal documents are folded, and it was held with a binder clip. She removed the clip and unfolded it. At the top, in the formal typeface of an official recorded instrument, Declaration of Restrictive Covenant and Conservation Easement, Harlan County, Kentucky, recorded October 14, 2009. Book 847, page 211. She read the first paragraph, then the second. Then she went back and read the first paragraph again, more slowly. She was still reading when the gravel moved again in the parking lot outside. She did not look up from the document. She already knew who it was. Dale Combs did not knock this time. He tried the front door, found it unlocked as she had left it, and came in. She heard his boots on the concrete floor of the front room, the pause when he found it empty, and then his footsteps moving toward the office. He appeared in the doorway. She was sitting at the desk with the document in front of her, reading. She did not look up immediately. She finished the paragraph she was on because Raymond had taught her, not in words, in the way he inhabited rooms, that a person who is reading something important should finish reading it before they acknowledge an interruption. Then she looked up. Dale's expression had shifted from the earlier cordiality into something that was trying to remain cordial and finding it slightly effortful. He was holding a manila envelope. He had not been holding it when he left. "I apologize for coming back so soon," he said. "I wanted to leave you something to look at." He set the envelope on the edge of the desk. "That's a formal purchase offer, standard form, everything filled in. The $67,000 is in there. Plus I've had my attorney add language covering the environmental assessment and the code fine. We take those on, you walk away clean. All you'd need to do is sign." She looked at the envelope. She did not pick it up. "I also want to be honest with you about something," Dale said, and his voice moved into a register she recognized. The register of a man who has decided that honesty, deployed carefully, is a form of pressure. "I've had my own attorney look at the property history. There's a question about the operating license lapse and how it interacts with the Sunoco agreement termination. It's not a simple situation. If that gets challenged during a title search, and it will get challenged, any competent buyer's attorney will raise it. You could be looking at a title cloud that makes the property very difficult to sell to anyone." He paused. "I'm offering you a clean exit from a complicated situation. That's worth something." She nodded slowly, the way she had nodded at Gary. Then she picked up the document from the desk and held it out to him. He took it with the slight hesitation of a man who does not know what he is being handed. He looked at the header. She watched his face move through several small adjustments as he read. The initial confidence of a man who reads legal documents regularly, then the slight frown of someone encountering something unexpected, then the stillness of full comprehension arriving. The Declaration of Restrictive Covenant and Conservation Easement had been recorded in Harlan County on October 14, 2009, in Book 847 at page 211 of the official records. Raymond Pruitt had filed it himself, without an attorney, using the standard county form available at the clerk's office. The document placed a permanent restrictive covenant on the Route 119 property, prohibiting its use for commercial aggregate operations, equipment staging, infrastructure development, or any use requiring the alteration of the natural water drainage patterns of the parcel. The covenant ran with the land. It was binding on all future owners. It could not be removed by sale, by inheritance, or by any private agreement between parties. Only by a circuit court proceeding showing material changed circumstances which required demonstrating that the original purpose of the restriction had been extinguished. The original purpose, as stated in the document's recital clause, was the preservation of the subsurface water access corridor underlying the parcel, which Raymond had described in precise legal language as a community water resource serving multiple downstream properties whose owners were identified by name in an attached exhibit. The exhibit listed 14 property owners, 14 families whose water access ran beneath this corner, 14 families who would have standing to contest any attempt to remove the covenant in circuit court. Dale Combs read the document for a long time. She did not rush him. The afternoon light through the north window had gone flat and gray, the way eastern Kentucky light goes in late March when the clouds come in off the mountain, and the office was quiet, except for the sound of the creek carrying its load of snowmelt somewhere below the tree line. He lowered the document. "When did he file this?" Dale said. It was not quite a question. 2009, she said. 17 years ago. He looked at the document again, at the recording information at the top. Book 847, page 211, the official stamp of the Harlan County Clerk's office. The notarization. All of it in order, all of it properly recorded, sitting in the public record for 17 years, in the way that documents sit in public records, unread by anyone who did not know to look for them, completely visible to anyone who did. She thought about 2009. Raymond had been 53. The station had still been running, barely. She had been working at the clerk's office. She had been in that building, at that office, when her husband had walked in and filed this document. She may have been 20 feet away. She had not known. Dale Combs set the document on the desk. The expression that crossed his face was not anger. It was something she found more interesting than anger. A genuine bewilderment, the particular look of a man whose arithmetic has always worked and has just encountered a variable he did not know existed. He was 63 years old, and he had been patient about this corner for a long time, and the man he'd been patient against had been dead for 6 weeks, and he had come here today with a number and a clean offer and an attorney's letter about title complexity, and none of it had anticipated this. "The water line," he said finally, not to her, to himself, or to some younger version of himself who should have understood what Raymond Pruitt understood about this parcel. "Yes," she said. He picked up his manila envelope from the edge of the desk. He looked at the document one more time where it lay. He did not ask her to reconsider. He did not make a secondary offer. He was, whatever else he was, a man who read a situation accurately when the facts were plain in front of him. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Pruitt," he said. And she believed him, or believed that some portion of him meant it, the portion that was still 19 years old and sitting in a truck in this parking lot, while a man inside saved his father's land. She said thank you. He left. She listened to the F-350 move through the gravel and out onto Route 119, and this time she did not go to the door to watch it go. She sat at the desk with the restrictive covenant in front of her and Raymond's composition book beside it, and the canvas bag of 47 letters beside that, and she looked at all of it in the flat grey light, and she thought about a man who had filed a document in 2009 to protect a corner he would not live to protect himself, against a threat he may not have been able to name yet, but had understood was coming in the way that careful people understand the shape of the future. He had been right. He had simply been right, and quiet about it, the way he was right about everything. She stayed until dark. Not because she had decided anything yet. She was careful with herself about that, about the difference between a feeling and a decision. She stayed because there was more to read, and she wanted to read it in this room, in Raymond's chair, with the composition book open on Raymond's desk, which was where it belonged. She read all 68 pages. She read all 47 letters. By the time she finished, the light through the north window was gone, and she was reading by the fluorescent bar she'd found working in the service bay, which she'd unclipped from its mount and carried into the office and propped against the filing cabinet. It threw a cold, flat light that Raymond would not have liked. She made a note to herself, not on paper, but in the part of the mind where practical things are stored, to bring a lamp. The last entry in the composition book was dated March 3rd, 2021, 11 months before his second hospitalization. The handwriting was the same as the first entry, she checked, holding the last page beside the first. Steady and deliberate, unchanged by the 28 years between them. Patty Sexton, 71, Loyal. Mineral rights challenge, same coal company that tried the Dunbar property in 2017. Filed objection on procedural grounds, same argument, different county form. Should hold. She doesn't know I did anything. That's fine. That's always been fine. That's always been fine. She closed the book. She put everything back in the document box. The composition book, the folded restrictive covenant, the canvas bag of letters. She set the combination. She set the box back in the recess and laid the tile panel over it and pushed the desk back into place. Then she sat for a while in the broken chair with the cold lamplight and thought about what she actually had. She had a property the county valued at $14,200 and a neighbor had valued at $67,000, and Raymond had valued at something that did not have a number because it was not that kind of value. She had a cinder block building with sound walls and a bad canopy, and 2 tanks that needed inspection, and a code fine of $340, and a mortgage-free deed in her name. She had $214 in a checking account and $11,400 on a Visa card and a part-time job that might still be hers if she asked. She had a restrictive covenant filed in 2009 that meant the property could not become what Dale Combs wanted it to become, which meant it was worth exactly as much as she decided to make it worth, and not $1 more to anyone else. She also had 61 names in a composition book and 47 letters in a canvas bag, and the understanding, arrived at slowly in a cold office over several hours, that this station had never been a filling station. It had been a door. Raymond had just kept the Sunoco sign up so people knew where to find it. She called Cecil Fraser the next morning. She asked him one question, whether he knew of anyone in the county who was currently in a property dispute they couldn't afford to fight. Cecil was quiet for a moment. Then he said he might know of 1 or 2 situations. She said she would be at the station on Route 119 on Thursday morning. She said she would have coffee. She said anyone who needed to talk about a land situation was welcome to come, and she would listen, and she would look at whatever they had, and she would tell them honestly what she thought, which was all Raymond had ever done, and probably all she was qualified to do, though she had spent 4 years at the county clerk's office reading property records, and 16 years before that in a county assessor's office in Bell County, and had perhaps absorbed more than she had credited herself for. Cecil said he'd make some calls. She thanked him and hung up. She drove to the hardware store and bought a lamp. The first person came on a Wednesday, a week before the Thursday she'd announced. A woman named Bertie Sizemore, 66, from Ages Road, outside of Evarts, who had driven past the station 3 times before pulling in. Norma watched her from the window, because she was not sure she had the right place, or the right idea, or enough courage for either. She came in holding a manila folder against her chest, the way people hold things they are afraid to lose. Norma made coffee. They sat at the counter, because there were no chairs in the front room yet, just the counter stools that had survived 11 years, and Bertie set her folder down, and Norma opened it and read what was inside. A condemnation notice from the county, a drainage easement claim, 60 days to respond, 30 of which were already gone. Norma read it twice. Then she read it a 3rd time, slowly, the way Raymond had taught her to read things without knowing he was teaching her, by the example of his own attention. There was a procedural error in the notice, a specific defect in the way the easement boundary had been described, which did not match the recorded survey in the PVA office. It was the kind of error that a person without training would not know to look for, and a person with training would find in the first careful reading. She told Bertie what she saw. She told her who to call at the county clerk's office, and what to ask for, and what to say when she got there. She wrote it down on the back of a receipt she found in her jacket pocket. Bertie looked at the paper. She looked at Norma. She said, "Did you used to do this kind of work?" Norma thought about how to answer that. "My husband did," she said finally. "I'm just learning the roads." What Raymond Pruitt understood, and what took Norma the better part of a year to understand fully, was that land in a place like Harlan County is not primarily an economic asset. It is the physical form of continuity. It is what allows a family to remain a family across generations, rather than becoming a collection of individuals scattered by the forces that scatter people. Losing it does not feel like losing money. It feels like losing the place where the story was being kept. He had spent 31 years making sure that story continued for 61 families who never knew his name. She intended to continue it for as many more as she was given time to reach. The canopy came down in April. She hired it done before it fell on its own, which the contractor said was maybe 2 months away. The code fine was paid. The tanks were inspected, passed and documented. The front room was cleaned and the counter was refinished, and 2 chairs appeared from her sister-in-law Donna's garage, which Donna contributed without being asked when she understood what Norma was doing, though her husband Gary had opinions about it that no one solicited. On the first Thursday in May, 4 people came. Norma made a full pot. The Sunoco sign stayed dark. There was nothing to announce. The people who needed the door would find it the same way they had always found it, through the ordinary human channels of a small county, where information moves like water through limestone, along paths established long before anyone thought to map them. The door was open. The coffee was on. The record continued.